England has lost more of its grand country homes to demolition than anyone is willing to admit. Palatial homes and castles that were introduced to the wrecking ball for no other purpose than expanding infrastructure, neglect, and neighborhood development. What could have been a land of castles was intentionally reduced to rubble in the 20th century. Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are uncovering England's lost country houses, not the ones lost to conflict, but the ones that were intentionally disposed of. We're about to see a ton of amazing country homes. Feel free to leave comments as we go along, and without further ado, let's dive into a special episode of This House. Some of these vanished country houses were sprawling, centuries-old structures that had become impossible to maintain. Others had been built in an era of confidence and expanding wealth, only to stand empty when fortunes failed to keep pace with their cost. We'll now take an in-depth look at a good handful of these homes, some that would be among the largest in the world had they not been demolished. AdderleyHall in Shropshire is a poignant example. The first version burned down, and the replacement, completed in 1879, initially embodied Victorian ideals of progress and architectural ambition. Yet after barely 60 years, rotten floors, mounting upkeep, and limited funds spelled the end of the house in 1955. Today, only the lodge entrance remains, a subtle reminder of the estate's earlier elegance. Aston Clinton House in Buckinghamshire, built in the mid-19th century, similarly reflects both the optimism that fueled its building and the pressures that led to its demise. Owned by branches of the Rothschild family, it became a center of horticultural accomplishment, with rare plants flourishing in its vast garden. It later served as a hospital for war casualties and then briefly housed a boys' school and a hotel, showing that grand homes often had to take on multiple roles to remain relevant. By 1958, the local council acquired the crumbling building, and it was soon demolished. Though its original stables survive, absorbed into a modern training center, the ornamental features of the extended garden remain scattered across the area now called Green Park, blending echoes of the house's grandeur with present-day educational activity. Beaudesert in Staffordshire sat on the edge of Cannock Chase, once a grand seat of the Paget family, the Marquesses of Angsley. It boasted extensive grounds, crafted interiors, and the famed Waterloo staircase, a tribute to military glory after the Battle of Waterloo. Changing fortunes caught up with the estate, however, and by the early 20th century, the furniture and interior details were auctioned. Demolition began in 1935, but was never fully completed. The remains of the walls and arches stand as haunting fragments. Even so, a portion of the estate continues in use as a scout and guide camp, preserving at least open green spaces for fresh chapters of communal life. Beaudesert Hall in Norfolk represented another aspect of aristocratic ambition. Its origins lay in a Norman family that accompanied William the Conqueror, and across time, it gained a 16th century gatehouse, ornate heraldic decorations, and a warren of rooms added by successive owners. By the 20th century, though its medieval brick walls, turrets, and once-green interior were besieged by neglect, crumbling architecture and proximity to new suburban development ensured that demolition became the only course, culminating in 1966. A few carved elements and fragments in local museums keep alive the memory of Beaudesert's unusual mixture of medieval and Tudor traditions. Beaudesert House in Wiltshire still has a famous surviving portion, but the grand big house part was lost in 1956. Built in the 18th century by the Earls of Shelburne, Beaudesert hosted such luminaries as Benjamin Franklin and the French revolutionary Mirabeau. It featured sweeping grounds by Lancelot Capability Brown and interiors designed by Robert Adam. But massive inheritance taxes and changing economic realities made upkeep punishingly expensive. Demolition seemed the only way forward, though the surviving portion remains open for visitors, and the estate's storied gardens and lakes still convey the grandeur of what was once one of England's most splendid houses. Clumber House in Cornwall was a Vespasian building on a site long owned by the Benayathan family. Rebuilt in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the house boasted impressive terraced gardens, as well as a broad park that showcased sweeping local vistas. In 1934, a devastating fire gutted the interior, leaving it unsuitable for modern usage. Post-war difficulties compounded the estate's troubles, and the shell of Clumber was left derelict and later pulled down. Cassiobury House in Watford, Hertfordshire had its roots in Tudor times, developed lavishly across centuries by the Capel family, the Earls of Essex. It was known for its important paintings, intricate Greenland Gibbons carvings, and wide parkland that welcomed local visitors. The arrival of heavy death duties in the early 20th century proved ruinous to the family fortune. After the paintings and carvings were sold off, some going to leading museums and private collectors in America, the house was demolished in 1927. Today, Cassiobury Park remains a much-loved public green space, and only a few hints of the grand old house survive, such as the original stable and yard archways. Clumber House in Nottinghamshire was once the grand seat of the Dukes of Newcastle. The property was designed to stand in an expansive parkland that included a picturesque lake, a chapel, and lavish gardens. Yet fires, maintenance expenses, and shifts in social structures eventually took a toll. By 1938, facing ongoing financial strain, the main house was demolished, though the Gothic Revival chapel, walled kitchen garden, and grounds were transferred to the National Trust. The estate has become a major countryside attraction, welcoming visitors to wander in the same parklands where a great house once stood. Cossey Hall near Norwich displayed a fantastical blend of Tudor architecture and 19th century additions thanks to the Ledingham family's expansions. Its turrets, tall chimneys, and romantic parkland views offered visitors a sense of stepping into a medieval reverie. Tragically, war requisition spelled doom for the hall. Cavalry and artillery regiments trained on the estate during the First World War, causing considerable damage. By 1919, it was deemed beyond repair and met the fate of demolition soon after, though the bell tower structure near the golf course still stands as a curious relic, gazing over fairways where knights and ladies once strolled. Dalpool in Cheshire was a short-lived dream commissioned in the 1880s by shipping magnate Thomas Henry Ismay, the man behind the White Star Line. Designed by the prominent architect Richard Norman Shaw, it was admired for its grand use of red sandstone and high-quality construction. Yet the Ismay family soon saw no real need for such a sprawling property, and by the 1920s, Dalpool's structural solidity could not save it from abandonment and eventual demolition. Today a newer home sits in its place, incorporating some of the old cellars and a few salvage elements like a large fireplace. Normanhurst Court in East Sussex, built by railway entrepreneur Thomas Brassey, seemingly merged a dramatic French chateau with traditional English country house elements. It changed hands through the Brassey line, at one time containing portraits by Walter Goodman and surrounded by extensive grounds. The property later served as a hospital for wounded soldiers in the First World War, then became a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War. Prolonged disuse made the cost of restoration impossible, and by 1951, Normanhurst Court had been demolished, with only the outbuildings left to hint at its presence. A caravan park now occupies much of the estate. Milner Field in West Yorkshire emerged in 1872 as the confident new home of Titus Salt Jr., scion of the Salt Mill and Saltaire family. Though richly furnished and strategically perched overlooking the Aire Valley, it suffered repeated setbacks, not least the financial misfortunes tied to ill-advised ventures. After hosting royal visitors and glittering social events, a final decline set in. Owners passed away prematurely or endured scandal, staff reported ill omens, and the once grand home stood empty, leading many to believe it was cursed. By the early 20th century, the building was derelict, and attempts to demolish it with explosions proved how strongly it was built. The resulting rubble remains hidden in woodland, with only the cellars sometimes explored by curious hikers who sense the uneasy stories that clung to Milner Field. Icklebury in Bedfordshire was built in 1683 by John Harvey, standing on an estate that had been historically significant since the medieval era. Throughout its life, it was enlarged and reworked, featuring handsome plaster ceilings and a dovecote. Tragically, in 1937, while the house stood empty after a school vacated, a fire gutted most of the interior, leaving only a fragment intact. The property was partially rebuilt on a smaller scale, then donated for school and community uses, until ultimately morphing into private homes and businesses. Highhead Castle in Cumbria began its story as a medieval fortress, extensively modified over time into a Georgian house filled with antique armor, carvings, and painted plaster. The building passed through owners who each tried to improve or preserve it, but a devastating fire in 1956 left it a hollow shell. Though prospective demolition was halted in the 1980s, the remains stand largely roofless, with only the external walls and gardens hinting at the castle's original scale. Ongoing stabilization efforts offer hope that the ruins, if not restored, will at least remain standing as a romantic vestige of centuries past. Harwick House in Suffolk, owned by the Cullum family for almost 3 centuries, featured Jacobean origins and carefully designed gardens that once impressed visitors with exotic plantings. Its owners included noted antiquarians and horticultural enthusiasts, and they even integrated the remains of older medieval structures into the house. Over time, the estate expanded to include myriad outbuildings, but the main house was auctioned off and dismantled in the 1920s following the death of its last family member. Haggerston Castle in Northumberland reached back to the medieval era, mentioned as early as 1311 and licensed to crenellate in 1345. It was enlarged and rebuilt, but rumors of a curse and multiple fires led to its final downfall in the early 20th century. Sold for its materials after 1933, only the rotunda and the tower were left, swallowed into a modern holiday park. Yet Haggerston's name lives on in an unexpected way. The original crossbreed trees grown on its grounds became the famed Leyland cypresses, now ubiquitous as fast-growing hedges. Goodrich Court in Herefordshire, conceived by the antiquarian Sir Samuel Rush Merrick, was a neo-Gothic fantasy facing the genuine medieval Goodrich Castle. Critics, including the poet Wordsworth, lamented the impertinence of its grandeur overshadowing the actual Norman fortress. Indeed, the house was built to showcase Merrick's vast armor and antiquities collection. After his death, it served numerous functions, even housing evacuee schoolchildren during World War II. but it was stripped of its fittings and demolished in 1949. Today, only its gatehouse and peripheral buildings remain, humble nods to the castle-like creation that once challenged the medieval authenticity across the valley. Glossop in Derbyshire, sometimes known as Royal Hall, was a favored retreat of the Howard family. Originally constructed in the early 18th century, it gained a new wing and a chapel around 1850, becoming a partial permanent home and part-time hunting lodge. Late in its history, Glossop Hall was adapted for educational use as Kingsmoor School between 1926 and 1946, reflecting the manner in which many large houses attempted to find alternative lives in the modern age. Eventually, it was demolished from 1958 to 1959, leaving behind its gardens, which became Manor Park. Osmeston Manor in Derbyshire was the triumph of Francis Wright, completed in 1849 with flamboyant neo-Tudor flair, towers, and high-end engineering such as a subterranean railway for deliveries. Successive owners ranged from industrialists to brewers, each adding expansions and hosting memorable events like polo matches and grand garden parties. Yet escalating expenses, coupled with the arrival of heavy taxation, forced the family to depart, leaving the great house to decline. By 1965, Osmeston Manor was demolished, though the terraces, ponds, and outbuildings remain as a wedding and events venue called Osmeston Park, carefully preserving the shape of its long-lost masterpiece. Sutton Scottsdale Hall in Derbyshire stands as a haunting shell, a Georgian mansion that once rivaled the scale of nearby Chatsworth. Its original interiors boasted stucco work by Italian masters and carved oak panels, but unmanageable debt and post-war neglect doomed the house to a piecemeal dismantling after 1919. Parts of its interior paneling landed in American museums or were purchased by private collectors. Now in the care of English Heritage, the imposing exterior walls remain, open to the sky and popular with visitors who glimpse the structure's dramatic symmetry, imagining the opulence that once filled its monumental rooms. The list of lost country houses goes on and on. Some were massive, rivaling the greatest extant estates in the UK, while others were more refined, though palatial in their own right. The fate of each of these houses, while varying in detail, underlines a common story about vast estates that became too large for modern times. War requisition, inheritance taxes, rural depopulation, and the waning appeal of life dependent on armies of servants all contributed to their decline. Many owners tried to hold on by selling art collections, renting to schools or hospitals, or turning to new commercial ventures, but more often than not, the tide of change proved unstoppable. From the partial survival of Bowood's smaller wing to the battered shells of Cossey Hall or Sutton Scottsdale, from the vanished gloss of Normanhurst Castle to the final resting place of Hardwicke House's once glorious libraries, these stories show how deeply real estate is intertwined with society's evolution. Although the houses themselves have gone, their memories remain through photographs, scattered artifacts, and the gardens and grounds that have often become public parks or open land, ensuring that even in their absence, England's lost country houses continue to shape the landscape and spark the imagination. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Did it surprise you how many lost country estates there have been in England, or maybe you'd rather tell me about which one was your favorite? Either way, let me know down below in the comments section. As always, thank you all for watching. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.